it's Miss Melissa with Oosterhout Free Library Summer Reading Program, Tales and Tales, and I hope you'll sign up online. Today we have the second part of the Triumphant Tale of the House Sparrow, written and illustrated by Jan Thornhill and published by Groundwood Books. Now, at the beginning of this book, we learned how tree sparrows multiply so quickly and eat so much grain that they're often considered a pest. In the end of the book, we'll find out what has happened while various countries have declared war, what they do with cigarettes, and how they learned to open doors. By the 1880s, across America, it was open season on the house sparrow. Over the next 20 years, hundreds of thousands of nests, eggs, and birds were destroyed. But it was like spitting on a forest fire. As the human population continued to grow, so too did the house sparrows. Then, suddenly, at the turn of the century, its numbers began to mysteriously decline. At the same time, streets had become alive with the sputtering engines and honking horns of automobiles. Can you guess why that might matter? Let's see. Year by year, the horsepower of combustion engines gradually replaced the horsepower of actual horses. And there had been a lot of horses. In 1900, there were at least 100,000 in New York City alone. Streets were so thick with manure that full-time workers had to be hired to shovel past at intersections to protect the hems of ladies' long dresses. But as the horse slowly disappeared, so did the spilled grain and grain-studded manure that the house sparrow relied on. Over the next 30 years, the house sparrow numbers fell dramatically. There was, however, no danger that it would become extinct. In fact, by 1943, when there were almost no horses left in cities, there were still 150 million house sparrows in North America, one for every man, woman, and child. The house sparrow is not the only sparrow that lives and thrives alongside humans. Now we're in a different part of the world. Can you guess? About 10,000 years ago in China, another sparrow began living near the first rice farmers. Like its cousin, the house sparrow, this eastern one evolved to live with people, eating the grains they grew and nesting in nearby trees and under eaves and in holes in their homes. The Eurasian tree sparrow had arrived. The house sparrow and the Eurasian tree sparrow are closely related, so it's not surprising that their behaviors, tastes, and life histories are a lot alike. The Eurasian tree sparrow also spread in exactly the same way as the house sparrow, by following the expansion of agriculture. And just like the house sparrow, it multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. It also attacked crops. By 1958, there were so many Eurasian tree sparrows in China that the country's leader declared war on them. He had calculated how many more human mouths could be fed if there were no sparrows. To him it was obvious. China didn't need such a greedy species. Scientists tried to warn him of what might happen if there were no Eurasian tree sparrows to control insect pests. He didn't listen. Instead, he told his people to kill every sparrow they saw. We saw that in other parts of the world in the first half of the book, right? Special days were chosen and everyone stayed home from work and school. Young and old alike rose before dawn and left their homes carrying anything that could make noise. From sunrise to sunset, everyone blew horns, clanged cymbals, and banged on drums, gongs, wash basins, and pots and pans. Now, how could noise kill them? The skittish sparrows tried to escape, but wherever they turned, there were more people making noise. The birds were too frightened to land. Instead, they dropped, exhausted, from the sky. It's possible that 1 billion sparrows died that year, and the scientists were right. Plagues of insects unlike anything ever seen before decimated crops across the land. By the end of the year, there was not enough food for China's growing population. In less than 3 years, more than 30 million people starved to death. Though the destruction of the Eurasian tree sparrow was not the sole cause, there was a lot of other things going on, it was likely a major contributor. After what happened in China, there were no more large-scale wars against either the house sparrow or the Eurasian tree sparrow. But wherever they lived, when their numbers got out of hand, people continued to try to get rid of them. Even so, by the late 1970s, there was still at least 1 billion of these two species on the planet. Then, for seemingly no reason, house sparrow numbers began to fall. A lot. In some places in the world, this population dropped by 1/4, then 1/3, then 1/2. The Netherlands was one of those places. Even though this tiny country still had 1 million house sparrows, the suddenness of the drop was so alarming that in 2004, the bird was listed as a protected species. But not everyone in Holland got the message. A year later, in an attempt to break the world record for toppling domino tiles, 4 million dominoes were set up in an exhibition center. Somehow, a house sparrow got into the building. It flew around and then it landed on a domino. In less than a minute, 23,000 tiles toppled over. To protect the other 3 million plus, a hunter was brought in to shoot the bird. The story made headlines around the world, and the hunter was fined. The dead house sparrow became so famous that it was stuffed and put on display in a museum, perched atop a box of dominoes. When bird populations crash so quickly, it usually means that most of the young are not living long enough to breed. Why might this have happened to the house sparrow? What has changed so drastically in such a short time? We have. All over the world, we changed our houses. Old-style thatched and curved tiled roofs have always been favored nesting sites for the house sparrow, but these materials have been replaced with modern steel roofing and flat shingles. To save energy, we have also begun to fill in every nook and cranny in old buildings. New buildings have no holes at all. In many neighborhoods, there are fewer trees, hedges, and ivy-covered walls, where the house sparrow likes to roost at night. Cities have fewer gardens to supply insects for nestlings, and there are fewer vacant lots to supply weed seeds. We've also changed the way we farm. To produce more and more food for growing human populations, we poison weeds before they have a chance to make seeds. We also poison insects. Grain is now grown in vast expanses far from the house sparrow's urban nesting sites and nighttime roosts. And we harvest, transport, and store this grain so efficiently that almost none is left behind or spilled. We also have more domestic cats than ever before, and we use cell phones that rely on towers that emit radiation, which might affect the house sparrow's ability to navigate and catch food. To top it all off, it used to be common for people to use tablecloths at every meal, and at the end of every meal, they'd shake off the crumbs outdoors. When was the last time you saw someone shaking a sparrow's meal off a tablecloth? In North America, house sparrow numbers have dropped so much in some communities that they've become hard to find. But unlike in Europe and India, in North America, no alarm has been sounded. The plight of the polar bear, an animal few have seen in the wild, is constantly in the news. But a sudden crash in populations of a bird that is so common you scarcely even notice it? No one seems to care. This is partly because many people believe the house sparrow never should have been brought to North America in the first place. They consider it an invasive species. Invasive species are plants or animals that have been introduced into new environments. They usually spread and multiply quickly, often competing with native species for breeding sites or food. It can become extremely difficult to control them, and expensive. Unquestionably, the house sparrow is a feisty competitor. Because it lives year-round in the same area, it usually gets first dibs on nesting boxes in the spring, even if they've been built for other species. If a bluebird, tree swallow, or other hole nesting species is lucky enough to snag a nesting box first, the house sparrow will push out the eggs or nestlings. It's even been known to kill adult birds. But wait a second. Was the house sparrow actually released into a new environment when it was brought to North America? Isn't its environment the same as ours? The towns and cities we build? Before there were electronic sensors to detect odorless gases, miners took caged canaries with them underground. Now, you might know this because there is history of coal mining in our region. If a buildup of dangerous gases occurred, a canary would sway drunkenly on its perch or fall off, and the miners would know to evacuate. Because the house sparrow normally lives its whole life in a very small area, it can be a living indicator of pollutants in that place. To scientists, it's just like a canary in a coal mine, except the coal mine is our urban environment. Since the house sparrow lives where we live, wouldn't it be smart to figure out why it's disappearing? What if the culprit is something as unhealthy for humans as it is for the tree sparrow? Though we still don't know what has been causing tree sparrow populations to decline, there's some good news. In the Netherlands and in England, the decline appears to be leveling out. Perhaps in these places, more people are welcoming the house sparrow to bird feeders, or they're providing more bird houses for it to nest in. Or maybe it has simply begun to adapt to our newfangled modern ways. The house sparrow is, after all, adaptable. For 10,000 years, it has changed as we have changed. It has followed us around the planet and can be found on every continent except Antarctica. It has built its nests in medieval churches, in the rigging of ships sailing the high seas, and in coal mines deep below the ground, where it shared grain with pit ponies. More recently, it has nested in traffic lights, in store sign letters, and even in outdoor barbecues. It has learned to stay up after dark to catch insects that are attracted by artificial lights. It has discovered that it can control the parasites that trouble its young by adding nicotine-laden cigarette butts to its nests. It has even learned how to open doors. All over the world, the house sparrow flies in and out of grocery stores, airports, and other buildings that offer food and shelter. All it has to do is flutter in front of the motion sensors of automatic doors to trigger them. And then, like magic, the doors whoosh open. If any animal is adaptable enough to survive in our fast-changing human environment, it is the house sparrow. I was fascinated to find out all that about a bird I'd never thought about before. We have lots of books here about birds, all kind of animals, fairy tales, all sorts of things that go with our summer reading theme of Tales and Tales. So I hope you'll sign up online. It's available for all ages. And come on and see us. You can take this book out of the library or call ahead to pick it up curbside. Bye-bye.